Welcome to Global View. Today I'm very excited to have the honor to have with us Governor, I will try not to mess with my accent this time, Blagojevich, Rod Blagojevich. Correct me if my accent is wrong. Thanks for
Well,
coming.
your accent's beautiful, but the pronunciation is not exactly right.
Exactly.
But
Let's make it right.
Blagojevich.
Blagoy
Blagojevich.
Blagojevich. Thanks for coming to Global View.
It rhymes with Papadopoulos.
Exactly.
It took me a while even to learn my surname from my husband too. So thanks again for joining the show. I will introduce your career, your excellent career. Of course, your life and career have been nothing short but extraordinary. A man who has experienced the hates of political power and the deaths of political persecution as well. Someone who understands firsthand how the system works and, more importantly, how it can be weaponized against those who challenge it. Rod Blagojevich, a name that many recognize, but few truly knows the full story behind the headlines, was born and raised in the tough street of Chicago, as George here, and you come from a family of hardworking immigrants from Serbia. Your political career took off when he was elected a US House of Representative, and he built a reputation as a fighter for the middle class, a champion of healthcare, and an advocate for the working Americans. His dedication to public service led him to the governor's office in 2002, when he became the first Democrat to win the Illinois election in decades, breaking the state's entrenched political cycle. As governor, Blagojevich expanded healthcare for children, implemented free public transportation for seniors, and invested in education. Unfortunately, because of political challenges that you faced and the name recognition you were gained at a very specific moment, but we will deep into that when Obama was raising into power as well, you faced unprecedented legal challenges in a time where not many were familiar with lawfare and political persecution. You were targeted and taken down through judicial means, but the story didn't end there. After 8 years behind bars, President Trump commuted your sentence in 2020, recognizing the injustice of this case. Since then, you emerged as a strong voice against political corruption. You became a critic of the deep states and an advocate to reforming a system that has been weaponized against those who dare to challenge establishment. Recently, President Trump granted you full pardon to reestablish justice, and you shift away from the Democratic Party you were once a rising star of to become a vocal advocate for Trump agenda for America. Welcome to the show, and thanks so much for giving us the honor to join us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
So, Governor, I would like to start one first question. Like, why did you shift from the Democratic Party? And do you think the Democratic Party, as you embraced it, has changed over time?
Well, I think there's two reasons that I've my political party affiliation and the priorities that I think are important to our country have changed. It's largely first, it's really more about what the Democratic Party has become and what they were supposed to be and what I thought they were. The Democratic Party that I was in is very much a different party today than it was back then. So that would be the principal reason. It's really based upon what the Democratic Party now is compared to what it used to be. But there's also a personal component, of course. President Trump has been extremely good to me personally and to my family. I talk about what he's done for me, and I think that it's pretty much him always doing things for me and me never doing enough for him. He not only pulled me out of prison, like you talked about, after spending 2,896 days there, almost 8 years, for politics, not for crimes. And then he just pardoned me a little over a week ago, and he did incidentally do that without me asking. He simply did it. He felt that that was the right thing to do. And another example of how President Trump will right wrongs and is willing to actually do things to make things better when he sees something that isn't right. But the Democratic Party has traditionally been the party of the working person, of ordinary people, like my mother and father were working people. You talked about my background. My dad was an immigrant from Serbia who became a factory worker, a steel worker. And my mother she was American born actually, but she was a working mom, worked in the public transit system here in Chicago, taking fares and passing out transfers at the subway stations, including the one in Lincoln Square, George, where you grew up, the Brown Line. She spent more of her time on the Blue Line. This is something that I know a lot about because, well, my mother worked there. But they never owned a home, and they worked hard and scrimped and saved and sacrificed, and everything they did was to give their boys, my older brother and me, opportunities they never had. It's really a very typical American story. It's what most parents do for their children. And when I became the governor, I joined a party. I should say, when I got into politics, I joined a party that I believed was on the side of people like my parents. And I think when I was a Democrat, we were. And I think the Republicans at the time I was in politics were a very different party than what they are today. They were a corporate country club party that was not interested in helping working people. But Donald Trump came along and he's changed all that. He's changed the Republican Party and he's made it a party that actually speaks for working people, everyday, ordinary Americans, at a time when my party, the Democratic Party, has abandoned them. The Democrat Party today is on the sides of they're on the side of the elites. They'll choose a Hollywood actor over a woman who waits on tables or a car mechanic who fixes somebody's car. They're on the side of Wall Street and the Silicon Valley billionaires. They put their interests above the interest of working people. And so the party is very different. It's also become a party that's no longer the party of that cared about freedom or freedom of speech. It's the party of woke and cancel culture and the absence of common sense. It's a party that doesn't really care about solving problems for people. They don't want to lose the issues. They'd rather divide America than bring us together. So it's a very different party than what it used to be. It's no longer the party of President Kennedy or even Bill Clinton. It's become a radicalized party where the ideology is more socialist than it is pursuing policies that create opportunity for people to get ahead, like has been the case with me and certainly with George. I know in your background, George, that's the Democratic Party I believe in, a party that was for opportunity, not to equalize things by bringing people down, but try to create equal opportunity so people can go up. That party doesn't exist anymore. And Trump has created this Republican Party that offers those opportunities for people. So my party has left me, to quote Ronald Reagan. I haven't left it. And in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, when President Trump gave me a call to tell me that he was going to pardon me, he asked me, what political party would you run on if you ever ran for office? And I told him, look, I'm a Trumpocrat. And he said, well, okay, I'll back you whether you're a Trumpocrat, a Republican, or a Democrat. I'm not saying I'm running for anything, but if you're asking me what my party affiliation is today, it's really Trumpocrat. This new Republican Party he's creating is the kind of party that I think I would be comfortable in and would be happy to be active in. But above all, I want to help him as much as I can. And it was fun in this campaign to be helpful to the extent that I was able to help, because I think he's not only a great guy, but I think he's going to be a great president.
I agree with you.
Totally agree, Mr. Governor. You know, our hometown of Chicago is known as a blue collar type of city, no nonsense. Families like yours, upbringing like yours is very common. It's not the exception, it's really the norm. It's not Los Angeles, it's not New York, it's Midwest, and it really represents, I think, America in so many ways, from the skyscrapers to the work ethic to the culture. So when you described the Democrat Party that you grew up in, and the Chicago politics and what it used to represent versus what Trump's Republican Party means today, the question I really have is, don't you think that cities like Chicago and states like Illinois are more reflective as an electorate of a party like the Republican Party today versus the Democrat Party? And if yes, how do you see the electorate swinging potentially in cities like Chicago and the state of Illinois moving forward?
It's a great question. And again, George, you know the city as well as I do. You know, when you were growing up, George, I presume Mayor Daley, the second Mayor Daley, was the mayor for most of the time you were growing up. And both those Daleys, the first Mayor Daley and the second Mayor Daley, you know, were traditional Democrats, the kinds that, you know, I like to think I was a member of that kind of a Democrat Party. They were not caught up in ideology. They were all about making things better for the city, solving the problems that everyday people had to face. The first Mayor Daley's motto was, you know, Daley, the city that works. It was a city that worked. And the second Mayor Daley was very much the same as his father. This was a city that worked. And under Daley, the second Daley, as when you were growing up, crime rates came down.
Yep.
They applied common sense, new approaches to addressing street gangs and street crime. You know, things like practical things like recognizing conditions in neighborhoods that were deteriorating and finding abandoned buildings and holding landlords and others accountable for keeping up their buildings, because those places became magnets for gangbangers to hang around. And, you know, Daley, the second Daley, when he was mayor, would never allow young gangbangers and ruffians to come from different parts of the city and invade downtown on the weekends. In fact, what he used to do is a practical thing. I know this for a fact because I was the governor, and before that I was a congressman, and before that I worked for him when he was the Cook County State's attorney, and I was a young prosecutor. Never knew him back then. He was number one, and I was like 795 in the pecking order. I was in the traffic court and the misdemeanor courts. I only got to meet my boss when I was in politics later on. But what he would do when these young kids the gangbangers would come downtown and cause havoc and want to cause havoc and maybe even, you know, crash into some of the stores and steal stuff with the kind of impunity they've done over the past several years here in Chicago since things have changed. What he would instruct the police to simply not allow them to get out of the elevated subways and send them back. But you can't do that today. Today's Democrats have abandoned the police, and the police are literally handcuffed, can't do their jobs. They're so much afraid, the Democrat Party, of doing their jobs, that the gangbangers know it. And, you know, I had those years in prison. I consider myself an expert in terms of, you know, how criminals operate. And I was in prison with a lot of guys who were not bad guys, but boy, it was a cat and mouse game between the cops and the inmates. So whenever the cops weren't around, the inmates knew it. They were always on the lookout for it. And once the cops weren't there, they would go do their things that were almost always on the wrong side of the line. And the gangbangers aren't stupid, and the criminals know. And that's what they do. They watch out to see where the police are, and when there's not enough of them, or they feel like the police are on the run because the politicians, the Democrat politicians, our Governor Pritzker, this Mayor Johnson, have abandoned the police. They're not stupid. And so they brazenly go and they carjack. They brazenly break into stores and steal things. They brazenly shoot people and kill people. And these are the simple, basic, common sense things that aren't hard to address. This Democrat Party, however, is not for those things. The new Trump Party very much is. And it's a party, too, Trump in particular, that's reaching out to traditional Democratic constituencies like the Black community and the Latino community. And it was evidenced in the last election when you look at the votes that President Trump received in the Black community, more votes than any Republicans received since 1976. And the unbelievable number of votes that he increasingly gets in the Latino community, because they understand and recognize the immigrant experience. And that is, you come to America to build a better life for your family. You have your faith in God, you value your family, and you value hard work. And that's what all you're looking for, is a chance and an opportunity to work hard and get ahead. That's the Democrat Party that once used to be on the side of people like that, no longer. And it's so caught up, the Democrat Party, in these ideological niceties that they're so interested in, that so many of them are so off the mainstream of what the needs of the people are, that I think the people have caught on. And again, Trump has filled the void with this new Republican Party that he's creating. And I think if he continues to govern as he has in the first month, and there's every reason to believe he will, more and more of the old traditional Democratic constituencies are going to leave the Democrat Party and become part of this new movement that Trump's been leading for the past nearly decade now.
You raised a very good point when you come to the creation of a brand new political movement by Trump. You said you're a Trumpcrat, the Trumpcrat, right? It's exactly on point, because it shifted away also from this stiff policies of the Republican Party that were a little bit far away from the social needs that the Democrats were trying to align with. So when I look at Chicago and I look at the issue with the law enforcement, I see a society where basically safety is an issue, because law enforcement is deployed to persecute political targets rather than prosecute criminals. And I see in people like you some fresh opportunity to merge the best of the both world for taking back Chicago, which is still an amazing city. Are you eventually considering to run for mayor?
You know, it's interesting. The talk of that has even preceded the pardon, George. And but since the pardon, a lot more people are talking about whether or not I'd be interested in doing something like that. And it's a few years off. And my answer is not so simple. It's complicated because, on the one hand, yes, I would very much like to do it because I really believe that I could do a great job here and bring and make Chicago great again because Chicago's a great city.
It
Sorry to
is.
tell you that, and I think you know that.
Yes.
So I do think that I could do that. And I do think that I could be very competitive in a mayoral race, notwithstanding everything that's happened in the past, for several reasons. Not the least of which is I truly believe you're supposed to be humble. The Bible teaches us humility, and yet it's hard to be that in politics. And that's one of my sins where I need to get better at. But I'm going to sin again. I think I was a great governor for the people. And one of the things I wouldn't do to the people of Illinois and certainly the people of Chicago was raise their taxes, which is what Democrats always want to do all the time, because the Democrat Party is all about taxing and maintaining the political coalition that gets them elected, but not necessarily going all out to solve all those problems. They may tinker at the edges because they're fearful that if they solve a problem, let's say in the Black community that has always been so unfairly treated throughout American history, today's Democrats only want to just do just so a little bit and keep the Black community in a position where they're dependent on Democratic politicians and government, as opposed to create real opportunities so that young Black children can have a chance to have the same opportunities that those of us who grew up on the other side of town have had. In other words, economic opportunity, a chance to go into a business, a chance to learn a trade, a chance to actually have an opportunity at a good job that gives you a future. Those things to this day are still not available to too many people in poor neighborhoods who are disproportionately Black, and the Democrats have failed them. And they've done it purposefully and cynically because they don't want to lose that base of a vote. It's why they hate Trump so much, these Democratic politicians, because Trump is actually trying to solve some of those conditions and improve opportunities for people who live in low-income areas. But to your question about whether I'd run for mayor or not, there's a part of me that very much wants to get back in it because I feel like I could do a great job. But there's also a part that feels like an athlete, George. You feel like the last fight you had, and I boxed in the Golden Gloves when I was a kid. When I was 18, I feel like they cheated me in that last fight, and there's that athletic thing where you want to get back in the ring and compete again and regain the success that you had just for personal reasons, which is not the right reason to run. There should be reasons that are much better than that, like what you could do for people. But there is that part of me. My difficulty is I have my family that has really suffered. My little girls were so little when all of this happened, and they've been harmed by the process psychologically. They're great kids, and my wife raised them by herself as a single mother while I was gone all those years. And they're both smart, and they're both honest. They both do good in school. They like their mother that way. But I think if I were to ever get back into politics, I have to be sure that, they're going to be comfortable with it. And my wife has said, George, a couple of times and several times in the public that if I were to do this again, I would do this, quote, with my second wife. So I've got to win my first primary. And my first primary is in my bedroom. And right now, as of today, it's a primary I'm losing, and I'm losing badly. But I'm not giving up hope that over time, as things develop, who knows, maybe she'll have a change of heart and a change of mind. And the good news is the mayor's race isn't for another couple of years. So it's not a decision I have to make right now.
And just on this point, your wife and your family did an outstanding job in advocating for you. I think everyone in America praised their courage and their strength and the courage to raise your children as well as she did, facing all these challenges. And I think many people underestimate what it means for the family to face those challenges. As someone who was also involved with my husband in a situation like that, I believe there is a lot behind the headlines that people should relate to when it comes to also restore justice. Because, a presidential pardon won't take away all these years that your family had to suffer for living this injustice on their skin. So what do you what would you say about, of course, I agree with you, your primary should be first in your bedroom, but what would you say to the family of people and the concept of justice overall, including also the feeling in the lives that are destroyed along with the target? How would you push back attention on this topic, and how your wife lived that years, besides, what I've seen advocating, as how this impacted overall your family?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a great question. I'm writing a book about the whole experience, and I've been at it now for about 20 months, and I've got almost 200,000 words. And the
Incredible.
publishers are telling me it's got to be down to like 100,000. So I'm in the process of actually cutting it back. And I find that very difficult. It's easier for me to write the words than it is for me to take them away because they're my words. And I'm a bit of a narcissist and I like those words. So I'm pulling them away. But I write about some of that. I write about my prison experience. I write about the story that starts with one President Obama, ends with another President Trump. But most of the story is about a governor in prison with Crips and Bloods and gangster disciples, Sinaloa cartel drug dealers who look up to the gangbanger El Chapo, the way my daughters look up to Taylor Swift. There were men in the prison I was in for the first 3 years who committed murder, bank robbers. There were about 400 sex offenders in there, which was shocking. There were over 950 guys. 2% were white collar, George, one governor, me. And I went from a 50,000 square foot governor's mansion to a 6 foot by 8 foot prison cell. So I write about that. And I also write about what you're suggesting, and that is, the impact this has on your family and on your children, and the hardship, the emotional hardship that they face and they suffer. And as bad as it was when I'd be locked in the dark and all those iron gates closed and shut you in, you'd have all that time on your hands to think and to worry, and you can't get out of that place. And I would think so frequently and be fearful of my daughters, who were little girls, and my wife and their safety. In the city of Chicago, where there is crime, and even at the best of times, Chicago being a big city, crime exists. I'm grateful for the 17th District Police Station and the police officers there who do such a great job in our neighborhood, and who certainly were looking out for my family, because God, we're blessed. Everything was fine. Nothing terrible happened while I was gone, though there were some incidents periodically because people know where we live because the media saw to that. But no, it's very hard in the family. And it's just not only my family, of course. I would be in the visiting room and I would see, an inmate with an older woman and holding hands. And you knew just by looking at the eyes of the woman and the sadness, you can just see that was his mother, and how the pain that the mom felt that her son was in prison, whether he did it or didn't. And in most cases, the guys I was in prison with, they did it. I mean, there are some really bad prosecutors, corrupt prosecutors who are weaponized, and it is a broken system. It's a politically weaponized system now, but it's also historically been a racist system, and there's still elements of that very much alive today. But most of the guys in prison I was with were guilty. I would argue, though, their sentences were draconian and without mercy, particularly those who were first-time nonviolent offenders. No violence in their case, and they had only committed a crime once where they were convicted. And these sentences were so long that they don't have a chance at a second chance. And then you think about their young children growing up without a father. And then when the father finally comes home in 15 years or whatever the case may be, the child won't know the father, and the father will be in a place where he doesn't have any real know-how and how to build a better life. And that's why we have recidivist rates that are better than 60, 70%, because the correction system doesn't do enough to prepare these guys for their return to society. So these are a lot of issues that I think I can be helpful on with regard to my experience, and share some insights with those who make the policies. But no, your question about the impact on the family is I would say, in my experience, as hard as it was to be locked into a prison with all those badass guys that I talked about, and to spend 8 years in prison and away from home and not being free, the hardest part for me was the hardship that this did to my children, my little girls, and to my wife. And those scars very much still exist. Our kids are they're great kids and very kind-hearted, but it's clear to me, I can't even mention anything about what happened in front of them. And I feel, in spite of it all, I feel it was all for a purpose, and what they meant for evil, God meant for good. That's out of Genesis chapter 50 in the Bible. And I feel like there's a reason it all happened. And I really believe that God has a plan for me to do something meaningful in this. And I have no problem talking about those hard years. And so when sometimes my daughters will overhear me talking about it, I don't really understand their reaction. And yet I don't, and yet I do, because I have to think back, they were just so little when this all happened. And, I was a grown man in the business, so it impacted them so much. It was more difficult, so much harder for them than it was for me.
And if I may add something just about it, I think that looking back, they can only be very proud of everything you've done, because actually you took on incredible policies. And I wish Illinois was a better place if they didn't go after you.
Thank you.
Mr. Governor, you mentioned things happen for a reason. And they also call Chicago the Windy City, but it's not because it's freezing in the winter like we know, but it's because the politics are, how the politics are, and they call it the Chicago machine politics as well. So correct me if I'm wrong. I saw you growing up in the city and in Illinois as the rising star of the Democrat Party. You had it all. You had the look, you had the policies, you had the family. You were a national figure, actually. I remember you going on shows nationwide. You weren't simply a local politician like so many of these other folks are, even if they want to be national figures. But then you also had a guy named Barack Obama, who I also think, and actually I know he wanted the stardom. He wanted to be the rising star, and he wanted the power. So it looked like you both inevitably were going to have this collision course, that somebody was going to take one of the other out, whether it was politically or, God forbid, a different way. No, I'm being facetious, but seriously, it looked like that was going to happen. And just looking at the situation, based on James Comey uh, prosecuting you, Barack Obama's involvement, the way he then rose up and how James Comey then defended him and targeted Trump, it was his henchman. Do you see a direct link between Comey's prosecution of you, his cover up for Obama, and the prosecution of Trump? Or do you think these are completely isolated events? Because for me, they seem completely linked.
I see a direct link. I write about that in the book. Very clear to me, the things
Yeah.
I know, and I know a lot about this part of it that most people don't know. And just to remind your listeners and your viewers, George, the whole thing started with Obama. He approached me on election night. He had an emissary approach me on election night to tell me that Barack had called him. That's what he said. Barack called me last night. And it was in Chicago, Grant Park, magical night, and it was historic. And it was a beautiful night in the sense that for the first time in America, a black person, a black man, was elected president of the United States. Now, any black child anywhere in America could one day think that maybe I could one day actually be the president of the United States, like a lot of other kids could always dream of being. And that was so powerful for our country and such a great step towards, creating this more perfect union, which has been an ongoing process throughout our history. And I was there, as were all the top political figures in Chicago or Illinois politics and national figures backstage. And this labor boss comes to me and he says, Barack called me last night. He wants Valerie Jarrett to be the senator. He wants me to ask you, what is it you want? And that began the discussions that this is effing gold. I'm not giving it up for nothing. We talked about political deals. They criminalized it in my case. None of it was illegal. Obama wanting to make a deal wasn't illegal. That's how politics works and how government works. But he went to the White House for 8 years. And I went to the Big House for 8 years. They arrested me at 6 o'clock in the morning on December 9th, 2008, in this neighborhood not far from where you used to live, George. And they had a 24-member SWAT team with them. And they had a hostage negotiator, which is ridiculous. They created this great big shock and awe to the arrest of a sitting governor, which was unnecessary, but it was done for optics and for psychological warfare, not to do the right thing. And then they had me in custody, and they were a good cop for a little while. And when I told them I had nothing to talk about because I did nothing wrong, and Obama didn't do anything wrong, that's just politics. They talked to him the very next day, and I have all kinds of evidence that shows that he made a deal with them. And the deal basically was we'll keep you in as U.S. attorneys. They were actually Bush-appointed U.S. attorneys until you get him, meaning me. And once they eventually got their convictions on fake using unlawful standards at a second trial, because they failed to convict me at a first trial on their fake charges. Once they got that, those guys that did this, Comey went on to bigger things. Fitzgerald was the U.S. attorney. He went to a big law firm making millions of dollars. They all got their reward for bagging a governor. And Obama let him alone. He didn't put a Democratic U.S. attorney in there. He kept them there and then made the change once they got me, and then they went to the private sector. And Obama was interviewed by them, and to this day, and by the way, he was interviewed the very next day after I was arrested. To this day, his interview is being covered up. There's a seal order on it. And when you're the criminal defendant like I was, George, you know a little bit about this, you're entitled to what they call discovery. You have a right to have all the evidence that could be used against you or could help you, could prove your innocence. Obama's interview was central to my case, and they wouldn't let us have it. I could never use it even in court. To this day, it's covered up. Although I think it's possible we may see what he ended up saying and whether he contradicted the star witness in the government's case. But that's for later on. But if you're asking me, is there a direct link? The answer is absolutely yes. And it was the same people using the same playbook. And Obama has the same sort of relationship in both cases that did to Trump what they did to me. And this is something I read about in the book, and I expand a little bit more on it. But no, yes, and you see that this is the disgraceful thing about Obama and Democratic politicians like him, and Republican politicians who would do the same thing, because they're not immune from this either. And that is that they would abuse the rule of law for politics. You see, that should be sacred in our country. And you come from a Greek ancestry, and we owe our democracy to ancient Greece and to the city-state and to the need for citizens to be involved, and how freedom is so connected to the law. And if you don't have the law being sacrosanct and being sacred, something that no one screws with, you don't abuse it for politics and misuse it for politics. If we continue down this path, we're going to lose our freedoms. And the United States of America will be no different from Russia or China or Iran. And that's what's at stake here. And so that's why Trump's election is so important to our country and to the cause of freedom in the United States. And if the U.S. is free, then the world has a chance to be free as well. And if we lose freedom here, Lincoln called it the last best hope on earth, freedom will be lost everywhere. And we will lose our freedoms because of the James Comeys and the Patrick Fitzgeralds and the Reed Shards and these corrupt, lying prosecutors who've turned themselves into political weapons, and the Fannie Willises and the Letitia Jameses and the Alvin Braggs and all these partisan Democrats who pursued Trump on fake charges before Democratic judges in Democratic jurisdictions. And the fact that half the country, hopefully a little less than half the country, the partisan Democratic voters refuse to have any objectivity and see through what was so obviously a series of corrupt prosecutions against Trump in the middle of a presidential race. How do they not see that? And so, no, Obama is the common denominator in my case and in Trump's situation. And I think that's the place to start if you want to actually find out the truth of what's happened and if we want to fix our system.
Just a quick follow-up to what you just said. Absolutely, the rule of law is sacrosanct in this country. And what the Democrats have certainly done is normalize selective and politically motivated targeting of dissent writ large and political opponents like you, President Trump, others who just stand in the way. So certainly that's something that I think Donald Trump's persecution this time around has really highlighted. Now, what I think is very interesting, and where you are in a very interesting critical period for you and the story and getting the facts out about what happened to you, is that President Trump is very close to you. He's pardoned you. He's been persecuted. He's been targeted by the same exact people that you had. The only difference that he has versus what you had is that we have decentralized media now and the advent of social media, and the mainstream media is losing its credibility and its grip on official narrative creation. Trust me, I remember what was going on during the whole Russia nonsense, the Russia collusion nonsense. The mainstream media back then, 2016, 2017, still had some sway on public opinion. They were able to manipulate people. Now they don't. shows like ours, other shows on X, Elon Musk's purchase of X is allowing facts to get out there, people to do their own research and to disseminate real facts the way that you're doing here. Exactly. So I think as just keep getting the story out the way you are now, and people will then understand exactly what you went through. And if you decide to run, it will not be a taint on you. You will actually be viewed as a martyr who went through fire, came out a stronger person, and have the will of the people on your side and do want to give back to them. So that's just a little tangent on what you just said, just my response to that. But
Can I address that real quick, George?
oh, absolutely.
Well, I became familiar with you when I was sheltering in place in prison, and they were doing it to you.
Yeah.
And I took a real interest in it because, again, when they do it to you, when you've experienced it yourself, you recognize it when they're doing it to somebody else. And I remember watching, one of the news programs, and you were the central part of the story and what was happening with some of the black guys that were friends of mine in prison. We were watching on the black TV because the TVs are segregated in prison. And so the black TV is the black guys watch CNN, the white guys they watch Fox News, and Univision and Telemundo are for the Latino guys. The TVs are all separate, except for the sports TV. But this particular night was CNN. You were on it. And the guys are sitting there and they're looking at your name. And one guy says, go, that dude's got more letters in his last name than you do. They couldn't say it. They can't say mine either. They couldn't. So I had to explain to them how you say Papadopoulos. Yeah. And then I explained to them, this guy's getting effed. I don't want to swear on your show. And I explained why and why I knew it because I'd experienced it myself. And so your willingness to stand up as you did, George, is a piece of this whole war against what they're doing, these weaponized prosecutors and stealing our freedoms and destroying the rule of law. And, it's in the Bible, resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. Yeah. And these are the right things for all of us to do. I think you're right. I think I have a unique perspective, and my experience and my story is really unique and central to this fight against this sort of counter-revolution against the revolution of weaponized prosecutors. And I don't think anybody really next to President Trump knows it better than me. And I have the one thing I do have that he doesn't have, thank goodness, is I've got those 8 years in prison. So I believe when you ask me, well, what happened to you in this whole stories, I've tried to explain it to my daughters whenever they give me a chance, which is very rarely because they never want to talk about it, is for a larger purpose. I spent 8 years in prison reading the Bible every day. I'm not here to proselytize my Christian Serbian Orthodox faith on anybody. These are decisions we should all make individually, I believe. But for me, I believe so much of it. It gave me such strength and a better understanding of the mysteries of what God wants from us. And I think you go through the fire, as you said. The prophet Isaiah writes about that, the fiery furnace of affliction. It's time of testing. And there's a sort of destiny that and a purpose that we all have. And I think you can discern some of that from your experiences and me, in my case, the experiences and the way I interpret the Bible, which means I have an obligation, a responsibility. I've been blessed to come home early from prison like I did, to get a full pardon by President Trump like I did, without even asking him. These are things that are happening outside of anything that I'm doing. It's sort of out of my control. I think it's part of a destiny. And what it tells me is, hey, we've been good to you. We're treating you good. You're given this new beginning and a chance to get your story out. You must do something. You must do something to be active in this fight against weaponization, lawfare, the perversion of the justice system for politics, and the preservation of our freedoms here in America, which is still the greatest country in the world, where a guy like George Papadopoulos with a name nobody can say, and a guy like Rod Blagojevich with a name nobody can say, can become somebody in this great country. So no, I have to do something about it. And if I don't, George, then I think I'm disobeying God. That's what I believe.
One last comment on this wonderful interview. I think there is a lesson to be learned, both on your personal level, a lesson of resilience, coming back, and powerful giving back to the people what you learned through your tough experience, but also some lesson about our great president, Donald Trump, who value personal qualities far beyond political colors. The fact that you were a Democrat didn't prevent Donald Trump to see the injustice that you were suffering and put repair, and pardoning you and commuting your sentencing and trying to restore what is right to do. So we are in a very happy time for America, I believe, where people like you, either you will decide to officially or unofficially contribute to shaping this new chapter of American politics, and people like the President Trump will do everything to restore what has been broken during these past years. Now, when we talk about lawfare and when we see Attorney General Pam Bondi or people like Kash Patel as the director of the FBI and other important and fearless fighters now at the government, do you think it will be enough? Those people will be enough to change the course of lawfare and to restore justice, or you believe there is more to be done?
Well, there's a lot to be done, and the lawfare is not going to stop just because President Trump has won and because he's appointed Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, head of the FBI and Attorney General. Those are great appointments by the president. Pam Bondi is a very highly intelligent, dedicated, committed public servant who will do the right thing. I have absolute confidence that she's going to be a great Attorney General. And the same with Kash Patel. And among the reasons why is because they have, leading up to this election, been vocal about precisely this issue and seeing through the corruption in the Department of Justice and the abuse of the rule of law for politics. So I have great optimism that the right people are in those places and that they're going to appoint the right people to work with them and to work on these issues, and that they're going to prioritize these issues. There's no doubt in my mind that Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and President Trump for sure will prioritize the reforming the justice system to do everything they can to get the politics out of it. So you can't use the law, pervert the law to get innocent people who are in politics who you can't beat in elections. But do I think it's going to be easy? It's going to be hard. And you have entrenched interests on the other side who don't want it to be, who want it to be the way they've been doing it, and you continue to use their power, unchecked power in the justice system as a political weapon against political people they want to persecute for whatever their motivations might be. So there's going to be tremendous opposition, and they have a strong alliance, strong allies in the Democratic political establishment. And you get serial liars like now U.S. Senator Adam Schiff, former congressman who I served with for a couple of years when he was first elected in 1998, when I was elected in Congress in 1996, or Adam Schiff was elected in 2000, but he came towards the end of my time in Congress before I became the governor. And it was really clear to me, even then working with him, that he became the guy that we know him to be, and that is that he's such a big liar. And he's a former U.S. attorney, interestingly enough, who just sees these things like the law or what the speeches that he gives on the floor of Congress or now in the United States Senate. He sees these things as means to a political end, not law or justice being the end and the politics being the means to get to that end. So this guy will say anything and do anything. And interestingly enough, he'll say these things when he lies. George, if you notice, he does them on the House floor or on the floor of the United States Senate, or he would do them in a courtroom as a U.S. attorney. Why? Because they have law. The law cloaks them with immunity. They can actually get away with making up all kinds of lies and can't be prosecuted because the law has protected them, shielded them with what's called sovereign immunity. So when Schiff gets up there in Congress, I saw this too from prison, and he starts talking about quoting Trump, and he makes up the whole thing. Do you remember this, George? And he's got Trump talking like he's, Vito Corleone, Don Corleone. Do you remember this? The whole thing was made up, but he's quoting Trump. He knows he can do that because he's got immunity. Now, if he does that outside of the Congress, it's a different story, but he does it. He does it inside there. So you're going to get opposition from people like that, and unfortunately, there are too many of them, and therefore, this is going to be a real fight and a real struggle. But I really believe at the end of the day, in the long run, as Dr. Martin Luther King used to say, truth crushed to earth will one day rise again because no lie can live forever. In the universe, here's another thing he would say, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And if we're vigilant and we're determined, and we all play our role to try to save our democracy and save our country, and join this president now who's determined to do it, and the Attorney General and the FBI Director, we've got the right people in the right place. All we just got to do is have the will to keep doing what we hope to do, I think we will dramatically reform the system. And Trump is not interested in using this as a cudgel against his enemies, like the Democrats are trying to say. They're trying to confuse the issue. I truly believe he wants to reform the system, and I believe he knows that he has a responsibility to do it, because America will no longer be America if we lose our freedoms, and we're going to lose our freedoms if the law becomes a political tool and a political weapon.
I think that this is my last question. This has been a fascinating conversation, Mr. Governor. I think in order to preserve our freedoms and our way of life, we need champions at the federal level, and we also need local representatives at the city and the state level. President Trump has taken a very keen interest on the city of Chicago. Borders Are Homan has actually gone to the city of Chicago in a very public way with Dr. Phil, where they were basically removing criminal elements, illegal criminal elements from the city that were causing havoc. And I think President Trump, in order to really take back America and to take back the inner cities that he is championing, he's going to need to take Chicago. So, and I don't think there's anybody on planet Earth who is more qualified or better suited to actually ride the wave of the America First policies, of the new conservative movement, of the new Republican Party than you. So my final question is, if President Trump picks up the phone and calls you and says, Rod, I want you to run for mayor of Chicago. How are you going to help me? And let's work together. How would you run as yourself now in the city of Chicago? Would you run as a Republican, an independent, a Democrat, or something blurred in between? What would the strategy be if you could divulge those details, of course?
No, actually, it's a great question, but it's an easy answer. But there's a complication to the answer, and that, of course, is the obstacle with Patty, my wife. And the other the issue is, if President Trump asked me to do just about anything, how do I not do it? He's been so good to me, right?
I agree.
But to answer your question about party affiliation, the good news is the mayor's race in Chicago is nonpartisan. You don't declare a party.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to run in any party. It's just a whole bunch of people that run. And the top two, if somebody doesn't get 50% plus one in the first round, then there's a runoff between the top two. So nobody has to say what party they're in or be part of any particular party. And so to answer your question, it's moot in this particular case for that particular office. Now, everybody's going to know that I'm a Trumpocrat. If anything, I would say I'm a Trumpocrat. And of course, I'll get all the good with that. And then a lot of my old friends in the Democratic Party will use Trump as a negative, which I would embrace with great enthusiasm, because I view it as nothing but a real positive. And that's another thing, by the way, real quick, it's a quick diversion, but this is what's so nice about Trump and what's so refreshing about him. He's just not one of your typical duplicitous fake politicians who are always trying to temper what they say because they're trying to speak to a certain constituency group. He's very authentic and very straightforward. And I think one of the things that he appreciates in people is not just loyalty, which he's very big on, and he's a very loyal person, but I think he appreciates people who are not afraid to take strong stance. Look at Pam Bondi, strong person, strong woman, takes strong stance. Kash Patel, strong stance. Dan Bongino, strong stance, like you, George. And I think the American people are getting sick and tired of these politicians who, talk out of both sides of their mouths. I was at Harvard, Kennedy School of Government. I could never get into Harvard out of my own school, George. The only way I told the students there, when I was speaking to them, that I can get to Harvard was I had to get elected governor of the fifth largest state, get arrested, and be sent to prison for 8 years, and then get out of prison. Then finally, Harvard gives me a chance to get in. And the kids were asking me about my record as a Democratic governor. And these are really smart students, smart in school, a little lacking in real life experience and street smarts, if you know what I'm saying,
Absolutely.
But really smart in school. And they were asking me and go down a list of some of the positions that I took when I was Democrat governor, and asked me how that squares with my support of President Trump. And I told them that a lot of it still does, and I tried to explain why it would. But at the end of the day, I said, let me tell you something. When you've been through something I've been through, and a guy gets you out of jail, I'm a single issue voter. You get me out of jail, you got my vote. But I have to say, in the case of President Trump, if he never got me out of jail, if he never pardoned me, if he just fired me on Celebrity Apprentice in a bad way, if I was never on Celebrity Apprentice, I'd have voted for him. The moment he came down that escalator, and I'm in prison watching that on the Black TV, CNN, in prison, and I see the positions he's taken and how the next day he's losing endorsements. He's actually losing money, but he won't back down. That told me this guy is what America needs. A guy who's really strong and tough and not your typical politician who just has to play at the margins and gives nice speeches promising hope and change where there was hope, but there was no change. People are sick of it. And what's beautiful about Trump and the kind of leadership he provides is that it's very real and he does things. And so I think he's going to reform the system. I think he's going to reform the justice system. I think there's a great opportunity for us to make that work for us as Americans, bring back common sense. And one last thing about what you said earlier, had there not been programs like yours, podcasts like yours, and alternative places for American people to go to get information, President Trump's fate would have maybe perhaps been as bad as mine. Mine would have been different had there been these opportunities to be able to explain to the American people in detail some of the complexities of situations when the powerful institutions like the Justice Department comes after you and lies about you the way they do, and the mainstream legacy media just goes along with it because it sells advertising.
So I couldn't agree more about your take on President Trump. And so let's leave this open. If President Trump called Patty and Patty will agree, then we will see you running for for Chicago's mayor.
By the way, that's a great idea. That'll be my answer. Mr. President, can I put my wife on the phone?
Hey.
I just put a little, I just tried to do a little mediation over there. So we hope you will make Chicago great again, because it's very much needed. And thank you so much for your time. One last question: where people can find your book and follow you?
So I haven't put it out for there's a place called Blago Book that actually just started the process of pre-sales. But I haven't aggressively pursued that yet because I'm still not quite at the point where I feel like that book's close to being done. It's going to for sure come out this year. And so there'll be a campaign when I'm done with the book to do a pre-sale period, which will be like a month or two before the book comes out, which will ideally come out in the fall. So it's called Blago Books, but they can wait if they want. I'll be happy to, hopefully have me back on and I can talk about that later when it's completely finished.
Anytime. Thank you so much.
And Mr. Governor, and on social media, where can our viewers follow you and follow any speaking events or anything else like that you're involved with?
Well, they can get me on X, George, at Real Blagojevich, at Real Blagojevich.
Perfect.
Thank you again. God bless you and your family.
Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Governor. It was great to have you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.